On July 4th at dawn, Russia launched widespread airstrikes on Ukrainian cities, including Kyiv and Odessa, causing casualties. A Russian drone with Chinese-made parts hit China's Odessa consulate. China has remained silent on the incident. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha confirmed that Ukrainian investigators discovered a significant amount of Chinese-made parts in the wreckage of drones that hit the consulate. He stated, "What an irony. Following tonight's massive Russian air attack on Ukraine, we discovered in Kyiv a component of a Russian-Iranian combat drone which was made in China and supplied just recently." There is no better example of how President Putin continues to escalate his war and acts of terror while involving other forces such as North Korean troops, Iranian weapons, and some Chinese manufacturers. The security of Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific regions are inextricably linked. On July 4th, the Ukrainian Security Service, SBU, released a statement confirming that parts labeled "Made in China" were found in the wreckage of Russian geranium suicide drones used in overnight airstrikes on Kyiv. These components were traced back to Suzhou Echoed Precision Manufacturing Co., Limited, a company based in Jiangsu, China. According to the Ukrainian Defense Express, Ukrainian authorities have initiated an investigation into the Chinese-made components and classified the attack as a war crime. Criminal proceedings have officially been launched under Article 438 of the Ukrainian Penal Code. The Ukrainian Security Service further stated that the components found were part of the ejection system of the geranium drones, with evidence suggesting they were used for precision guidance to target locations in Kyiv. Interestingly, Chinese state-backed company NetEase reported on July 5th, stating Ukraine is trying to sow discord between China and Russia. Ukraine should carefully consider how to respond to Russia's upcoming summer offensive. Comments from mainland Chinese netizens in the discussion section were also noteworthy. "How embarrassing. The clown turned out to be us. We've lifted a rock only to drop it on our own feet." Some netizens commented, "The official website of this Suzhou-based factory is now inaccessible. Haha." Dr. Shen Mingxi, director and researcher at the Taiwan Institute of National Defense and Security Research, stated that Russia is increasingly seeking greater military achievements on the battlefield in Ukraine. This, in turn, has led to a growing need for support from China and North Korea. This indicates that China-Russia military cooperation has escalated from tactical support to system integration. It shows that Chinese assistance to Russia has become a systematic operation. Dr. Shen remarked, "China's support for Russia will continue, while this support may not be as direct as North Korea's, such as delivering complete artillery or missiles. It will include various components or logistical supplies, particularly crucial parts for missiles, fuel, or drone-related components that Russia is currently using to attack Ukraine. These supplies are extremely important to Russia." The situation with Odessa Consulate is undeniably ironic. When Russia uses drones to attack and their precision is not sufficient, it naturally leads to unintended casualties or damage. However, the Chinese government is unlikely to give much attention to these issues. It has shown little concern about the damage to its own civilian facilities or harm to people. Therefore, China's support for Russia will not stop or be affected by this incident, including the attack on the Odessa consulate. Dr. Shen Mingxi pointed out that China's support for Russia, including supplies and military intelligence, is driven by a desire to gain strategic returns. In the event of conflict in the Taiwan Strait, East China Sea, or South China Sea, China expects Russia to provide equivalent strategic support in return. Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service Director Ole Avashenko previously revealed that China has provided Russia with mechanical equipment, specialized chemicals, gunpowder, and critical components. Approximately 80% of the electronic components in some Russian drones are sourced from China. Despite China's continued denial of any form of military assistance, both US and Europe have imposed sanctions on dozens of Chinese companies suspected of supporting the Russian military-industrial complex. Dr. Zhong Ji-hong, an assistant researcher at the Taiwan Institute of National Defense and Security Research, stated, In fact, NATO officially designated China as Russia's primary supporter in the Russia-Ukraine war during last year's summit. The discovery of Chinese components in Russian military weapons is unsurprising. It confirms China's support for Russia's war efforts. He stated, despite sanctions from the US and Europe, China's extensive supply and financial support enable Russia to sustain the war. This demonstrates an implicit strategic and military alliance between China and Russia. Trump's global strategy aimed to shift focus from Europe to the Indo-Pacific, prioritizing China over Russia as the US sought to avoid simultaneous major conflicts. Senior analysts note Trump seeks a Russia-Ukraine ceasefire to focus on China but faces significant challenges. On June 1st, Ukraine launched its largest long-range attack since the war began, using drones hidden in Russian territory to strike 40 Russian strategic bombers at 4 military bases. Ukraine held it as a major victory, but President Trump said it gave Russia justification to prolong and intensify the war. Though opinions on Trump's remarks differ, this equivalent undoubtedly hindered ceasefire efforts. The attack was a tactical success, not a strategic turning point altering the war's course. While Russia's response was initially restrained, Putin recently told Trump that Russia will pursue its strategic goals, effectively rejecting the ceasefire proposal. Ukraine's attack, though significant, lacked the precision of Israel's strikes against the IRGC and failed to disrupt Russian military operations. Critically, it is unsustainable. Thus, the seemingly successful tactical strike, which missed strategic goals and cannot be sustained, holds mostly symbolic value. If Russia fought alone against Ukraine and the US-European coalition, this attack might have crippled its military. Instead, it has driven Putin closer to China despite his awareness that China benefits most from this war. For an authoritarian leader, a ceasefire now will be perilous, facing domestic opposition ready to pounce. Such a move would risk political suicide and trigger an existential crisis. Yet events outpace plans, analysts observed, noting an overconfident Chinese foreign minister inadvertently exposed a truth meant to stay hidden. On July 2nd, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met EU diplomat Kaja Kallas in Brussels for 4 hours. The agenda included sensitive issues like cybersecurity, trade disputes, and Taiwan. EU officials were stunned when Wang Yi bluntly said Beijing cannot accept Russia's defeat in the Ukraine war. The South China Morning Post cited sources reported Beijing fears that a Russian loss would prompt the US to swiftly target China. Wang Yi's statement shattered China's claimed neutrality, confirming suspicions among European leaders a prolonged Russian-Ukraine war serves Beijing interests by depleting US strategic resources. Wang Yi, realizing his gaffe, quickly defended Beijing, denying direct military or financial aid to Russia and claiming if we had intervened, this war would have ended. Responding to Wang Yi's bold rhetoric, Kaja Kallas sharply criticized Beijing for playing both sides, supporting Russia's war while pursuing business and ties with Europe. She stressed Beijing must resolve this contradictory stance and stop threatening European security. Some analysts suggest Wang Yi's remarks were not accidental, but a deliberate leak, signaling that China's support for Russia targets US strategic containment, not the EU. Whether deliberate or not, the EU has long held evidence of China supplying dual-use materials to Russia and remain highly vigilant. The EU plans to sanction 2 Chinese banks for allegedly helping Russia evade financial restrictions. Analysts note that the Chinese foreign minister's remarks merely exposed a known secret, publicly revealing covert actions. Unmasking China harms its interest as it limits the maneuverability of its hidden proxies. Europe will likely shift from indecision to opposition against China. Chinese scholars within the regime observe that the EU has subtly redefined China as part of an adversarial camp. On July 4, 2025, Xinhua, director of the EU Studies Center at Shanghai International Studies University, spoke at a seminar on US-EU relations in the Trump 2.0 era. He noted that since Trump's return, US-EU economic and technological conflicts have surged, dismantling prior coordination mechanisms and shifting strategic outlooks. The Trump administration views Europe's liberal and progressive ideology as misguided. Xing highlighted the EU's triple anxieties in technology and economics: research and industrial competitiveness, geopolitical resilience, and control over critical resources and data. These concerns have reshaped the EU's stance towards China. He stressed that the EU's 2019 view of China as a partner, competitor, and systemic rival has collapsed. Competition and conflict now dominate EU-China relations, with the EU increasingly seeing China as part of an adversarial camp. Xinhua noted that despite the strain from Trump's policies, the EU has not drawn closer to China. Instead, it leverages US-China tensions to extract concessions benefiting Europe. This reflects deep EU concerns about China's challenging and threatening nature, with little desire to mend ties. The EU is steadily reshaping supply chains to reduce reliance on China and tightening defenses against Chinese investments and acquisitions to protect strategic assets. Trade tensions in electric vehicles and spirits are intensifying. Last year, the EU imposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and on July 5th, China responded with anti-dumping tariffs of up to 34.9% on brandy, normalizing trade disputes. Australian legal scholar Yuan Hongbing stated that China's support for Russia is a systemic strategic effort across political, economic, and military domains. Its goal is to divert US and European resources to Europe, easing China's Indo-Pacific pressures. China cannot accept Russia's defeat. Xinhua stated Trump 2.0 and his team recognize that China's totalitarian regime poses the primary global threat and a major risk to US interest. Thus, they are redirecting US military forces from Europe and the Middle East to Asia Pacific to counter a potential Taiwan Strait conflict initiated by China. Analysts note that the Russia-China alliance has evolved through three turbulent stages. In the first stage, at the onset of the Russian-Ukraine war, China urged Russia to invade Ukraine. Russia, expecting a swift victory, relied on China for international support and protection against sanctions. At this stage, China's need for Russia far exceeded Russia's dependence on China. In the second stage, the Russia-Ukraine war defined expectations. Ukraine's fierce resistance slowed Russia's advances, with heavy losses to aircraft, tanks, and troops. Global opinion shifted towards Ukraine, and US and European sanctions targeted Russia. Consequently, Russia leaned heavily on China, seeking to pull it deeper into the conflict. Before August 2022, Russian General Yuri Nikolaevich Beloversky praised Chinese quadcopters for revolutionizing Russian artillery, lauding DJI Innovations drones in modern warfare. DJI quickly distanced itself from his remarks. Chinese netizens questioned if Russia was praising to harm, asking if Russia cared about China. Why mention this? Are they pushing for US and European sanctions on DJI or further penalties against China? In this phase, Russia sought to bind China to its war efforts, but China held the upper hand. While aiding Russia militarily, China deepened trade with Europe. Satisfied with restraining the US through Russia, China had to fully support it. Both nations were deeply independent, each needing the other. The third stage emerged before Trump's election victory and return to the White House. Russia sensed a shift, with Putin seeing a chance to ease confrontation with the US and Europe without sacrificing hard-won battlefield gains. Trump's focus on China gave Putin room to maneuver, aiming to exploit US-China tensions for maximum gain. As Russia's reliance on China waned, the balance tipped in Russia's favor. China needs for Russia now to surpasses Russia's need for China, and the foreign minister's candid remarks reflected this truth. After Ukraine's largest attack on Russian soil, Putin restrained signaled openness to future ceasefire talks. Analysts note that public information suggests Trump, after a July 3 call with Putin, expressed disappointment, stating Putin seemed unwilling to end the Ukraine war. However, public access to details about the intricate US, Russia, China, Europe dynamics is often delayed and limited. Intriguingly, a Russian drone strike on China's Odessa consulate raises questions. Was it mere coincidence or intentional? Could it review Putin's view that the Chinese Communist Party is the true adversary?